Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, Chile, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. North Phoenix, after midnight, September 9th, 2024. A red Prius sits off axis in a Home Depot parking lot. Streetlight glare skims the windshield. Voices overlap. Someone calls for towels. Someone yells for pressure. Within minutes, uniformed officers slide in under flashing bars and take over from neighbors who refuse to look away. The woman in the driver's seat is identified as Alicia Grant, newly married, breathing shallow. Paramedics work fast. The transfer to a Phoenix hospital is immediate. The first 5 minutes of any homicide file are often the cleanest. Dispatch records show multiple stabbing reports stacked almost back to back. Responding units log arrival times within a tight window. At the car, a driver's seat occupied by the victim, a passenger door that witnesses say had just opened, a brief confrontation between a man and a passerby, a bag removed, a run on foot. That sequence becomes the first backbone of the case, not because it explains everything, but because it is time-stamped and repeatable. What's not in those earliest accounts matters too. No witness describes an unknown assailant leaning into the driver's side or fleeing from the vehicle. No second shadow at the door. For investigators, negative observations are more than blanks. They rule out whole categories of theories before they waste hours. If no stranger reached into the car, the scope narrows. Who was already inside and who left? Officers contain the lane of travel through the lot and keep the approach corridor clean. They do not chase every shouting voice. They lock the scene, then identify the few people who actually touched the victim or the vehicle. Bystanders who applied pressure are escorted away for statements and medical decontamination. In the swirl of noise, the basics hold. The Prius is stationary, the victim is alive on arrival, the window to save her is closing. Transport buys minutes, not certainty. In the ambulance, vitals are tracked and recorded. At the hospital, the clock continues. Intake, emergent measures, notifications. On the curb back at the lot, the police perimeter holds. Cameras on the building faces and light poles are noted for retrieval. Officers begin the slow work of splitting rumor from record. Social media chatter is ignored. It is time-stamped witness statements and the computer-aided dispatch log that will stand up in court. Inside that narrow response window, one fact rises above speculation. The victim fighting to breathe uses what's often called a dying declaration, a statement given under the shadow of imminent death. The exact words are documented by an officer engaged in life-saving measures. What the declaration says is not analyzed here for drama. It's preserved because its legal status could decide admissibility later. The job in this chapter isn't to litigate it, it's to place it where it belongs on the timeline. Back at the lot, evidence control is already in motion. The officers identify who touched the car, who supplied towels, who moved items, and who left. They note the direction of flight described by a passerby and the fact that a bag was removed from the passenger side. Each small, boring detail pushes the case away from guesswork and toward a single, testable path. The questions are blunt, not poetic. What touched what? Who was where? When did they leave? Before sunrise, another anchor drops into the file. A 911 call from a man who states he stabbed the victim and gives information that leads officers to a knife for recovery. That call will become a digital pillar in Chapter 4. For now, it closes the loop on the overnight timeline without naming anyone for you. A clean chain of minutes is stronger than any monologue. If you've watched enough cases collapse, you know the danger when data seems too tidy. The data aligned cleanly here, maybe too cleanly. Was the narrow witness set overlooking someone just out of frame? Or was this simply a crime with no mystery guest? In towns like this part of Phoenix, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The quickest way to honor that truth is to stay clinical, fix the minutes, protect the chain, and let the lab and the law do the rest. The progression from lot to hospital to evidence locker is not cinematic. It's forms, seals, and signatures. But that is where most homicide files either hold or snap. For Alicia Grant, the system worked the way it was designed. Separate noise from signal, secure what's real, and move fast enough to keep proof from slipping away. We will not retell discovery again. From here on, Each chapter adds a new forensic or procedural layer. No loops, no second scene, no alternate ending. Next, the body becomes its own scene. Intake identifiers, seal numbers, and the split between preliminary observations and confirmed determinations, built for admissibility, not headlines. Once the hospital team stops fighting the clock, the paperwork starts building the case. The handoff from emergency medicine to the medical examiner is not dramatic, but it is decisive. On September 9, 2024, in Phoenix, the decedent, identified as Alicia Grant, enters the medico-legal system under a case number, not a headline. Custodial control changes hands by signature. The hospital releases remains and property to the ME transport team. The Phoenix officer assigned to scene security logs the transfer time to the minute. Each signatory is readable. If one name is missing, later motions will find it. At intake, the body becomes its own scene. Technicians document identifying features, clothing, and any medical interventions performed in the attempt to save her life. They photograph the exterior condition before anything is removed. They record the presence and placement of medical tubing, dressings, and trauma shears so a defense cannot later argue that treatment created artifacts. Clothing is dried if necessary, packaged in breathable paper, sealed, and labeled with date, time, initials, and item numbers. Paper, not plastic, prevents degradation and mold. The inventory sheet mirrors the property tag. The outer seal carries the same initials as the inner seals. These duplications are intentional. Preliminary is the most important word in the first hour. Intake notes may list sharp force injuries consistent with a knife attack, but they stop short of formal determinations. The confirmed findings will come only after a methodical exam, external survey, internal examination, evidence collection, and laboratory workups, such as toxicology. That separation matters in court. If anyone on the team confuses a first look with a final conclusion, opposing counsel will use the confusion to erode credibility. Evidence handling continues as if defense counsel were watching over the shoulder. Fingernail clippings or swabs are collected to preserve potential transfer DNA. Each sample goes into its own envelope with unique identifiers. Buckle standards, if taken with consent and proper authority, are documented separately. Any loose trace, hair, fibers, is recovered with clean instruments and forceps, then sealed. If a sexual assault kit is not indicated by the case facts, the team does not generate one by routine. Scope creep invites challenges. The ME's office logs who requested which analyses and why. Because the incident began in a vehicle, the property section stays aligned with the police evidence room. The Prius is not examined here. That work belongs to crime scene personnel and will appear later in the file. What the ME team does collect are items that remain with the decedent: clothing layers, personal effects retained by medical staff, and any trace still on the body. Chain of custody forms cross-reference the police event number, so the county's two systems, health and law, speak the same language. That cross-reference is how prosecutors later build a straight bridge from a trauma bay to a courtroom exhibit without gaps. The external survey avoids speculation. Wound tracks, their locations, and their orientation are measured and diagrammed, not dramatized. In a YouTube-safe retelling, it's enough, and responsible, to say this: the injuries are consistent with a stabbing reported by officers and later admitted in a 911 call from a man connected to the victim. We do not publish counts or graphic descriptions because the public record does not require them for understanding, and gratuitous specificity can harm families who have to live with those words. Precision in process is more valuable than color in prose. Statements made by the victim before death live in a different legal lane. The officer's documentation of the dying declaration is preserved in the investigative file. The ME notes that a statement exists but does not validate content. Admissibility, under the dying declaration exception, will be a courtroom question, not a morgue conclusion. Keeping lanes separate protects both. When cases fail, it is often because teams tried to answer each other's questions without jurisdiction. This office doesn't assign guilt, it assigns medical facts and maintains evidence integrity. Toxicology is ordered according to policy. Even if intoxication is not suspected, baseline panels document the absence or presence of substances that might explain physiology or behavior. Those results can take time. They return as laboratory reports and are attached to the final autopsy packet. A prosecutor weighing a plea or trial posture later needs all of it. The cause of death supported by pathology, contributing factors ruled in or out by tox, and every seal intact. In cases like this, the defense may scrutinize whether emergency interventions could have obscured wound margins or altered evidence. Anticipating that argument, the intake photographs capture the precise state of dressings and devices on arrival. The treating hospital's records, time of arrival, procedures attempted, medications administered, are preserved under subpoena, not because anyone doubts the clinicians, but because timelines win or lose admissibility. When times conflict, the state must reconcile them before a defense lawyer does it in front of a jury. Nothing about this process asks you to suspend disbelief. It asks you to prioritize trackable facts over narrative flourish. In towns like this part of Phoenix, murders aren't just crimes. They quietly tear at the neighborhood's trust that an ordinary night will stay ordinary. The least we can do in the retelling is meet the same standard the system set overnight. Write what happened, show who handled it, and keep every number, seal, and signature aligned. There is one more boundary to mark before we leave this room. The medical examiner's findings will support the charging decision you'll hear about later. They will not decide motive, they will not speak to relationship dynamics, and they will not guess at the argument inside the car. The discipline here is not coldness, it's respect. A clean record honors a victim more than any adjectives ever could. With custody secured and preliminary observations logged, investigators return to the Prius, the other container of trace and time, to see whether the car agrees with the body. The parking lot perimeter holds while the red Prius is treated like a container of trace and time. Technicians start with fixed position photographs, every angle, every panel, tire to roofline, before a single door is touched. The vehicle sits slightly off-axis within the stall lines. There's no broken glass on the asphalt, no pry marks at seams, no sign anyone forced their way in. Those quiet anomalies matter. They suggest the event began inside a closed car, not at the door. Exterior processing follows a standard path. Document first, then collect. A light pass with oblique illumination checks for latent transfer on handles and window edges. Each potential ridge or smear is flagged for powder or chemical processing later at the lab. License plate and VIN are captured for chain continuity. The goal is simple. If a defense team later claims contamination, the photo set shows what was changed. Nothing before evidence work started. Interior work begins with position notes, not conclusions. Seat tracks are measured and photographed so their fore-aft settings can be compared against known statures later. Climate controls and radio status are documented in place. Ignition position is recorded. The driver's seat is occupied in the earlier response phase. Now, with the body no longer present, the technicians photograph the cushion, backrest, and contact points for any transfer trace that survived treatment. Again, the language stays clinical. This is a homicide file, not a script. What's preserved today will be argued months from now. Bag and tag discipline is strict. Any loose items in the front cabin are logged, placed in separate paper sacks with item numbers, and sealed with initials and time. The passenger side, where a man was reported exiting and removing a bag, gets special attention. Footwell debris is collected with clean forceps. Floor mats are lifted for trace. If an item could plausibly account for a missing object the bystander mentioned, it's logged without editorializing. The working theory can wait. The bag and tag can't. Touch DNA and latent prints are treated as separate lanes. Steering wheel segments, gear selector surfaces, door pulls, and belt buckles are swabbed in discrete quadrants to avoid mixed samples. Each swab tube is labeled with the vehicle number, location code, date, and initials. Latent development on glossy interior trim is deferred if there's any risk of destroying potential DNA. Priority is given according to surface type and expected yield. Where both are feasible, the sequence is fixed in the worksheet so nothing happens out of order. The instrument cluster and center stack screens are photographed for any prompts or notifications that might indicate recent activity. If a device cable is present, it's packaged separately. No one powers anything on at the scene. That's not drama, that's policy. Powering up can alter timestamps. Chain integrity means leaving that digital angle to the lab and Chapter 4's record work. Trunk space is processed last. The spare tire well is lifted and checked. Any cleaning agents or absorbent materials, if present, would be collected, but the team doesn't assume. Without an official record describing cleanup, the language in this report stays neutral. Storage pockets and seatback compartments get the same paper sack treatment. A vehicle this compact offers few hiding places, which helps. It also leaves little margin for sloppy technique, which hurts. Every movement is logged. While the car is being processed, another team canvasses the perimeter for cameras. Exterior facades, light standards, and adjacent storefronts are noted by address for later retrieval requests. The goal isn't to narrate a chase that may not exist. It's to lock down what the lot itself saw in the hour around the assault. If footage exists, it will be reconciled with dispatch stamps and witness statements, not with memory. The recovered knife, guided by a later 911 admission, is documented under a separate chain. It does not ride in the Prius log. That separation matters in court and keeps defense arguments about cross-contamination from gaining traction. The technicians treating the car do not handle the weapon. Their initials should never appear on its seal. When the on-site work concludes, the Prius is wrapped and towed to a secure bay. Entry logs show who has access and when. Nothing about those pages is exciting, and that's precisely why they're valuable. Juries often trust boredom. It reads as authenticity. For the family, clean process is the closest thing to a guarantee that facts won't get lost or bent on the way to a courtroom. A brief word about inferences. It's tempting to read posture into seat travel or to guess at right versus left-hand dominance from touch patterns. Investigators resisted here. Measurements and samples go forward labeled as working until the lab returns results that earn the word confirmed. And because this case is on the record, we stay inside what's been publicly reported. A vehicle, a confined assault, a later call that led to a knife. The rest is measured, not imagined. Next comes the part many viewers underestimate, the digital layer. Call logs, dispatch times, and where they intersect with any camera retrievals. The cleanest files don't win because they're gripping. They win because every number says the same thing. We move from fiber and fingerprints to timestamps that don't blink. Dispatch pulls the computer-aided dispatch log and stacks every call tied to the Home Depot lot. Caller IDs redacted, times intact. The sequence holds, multiple stabbing reports within minutes, officers on scene shortly after, medics moving the victim fast. Those marks become the spine. Anything we add now has to snap to that spine or it gets cut. Audio from 911 is preserved to evidence standards, a digital original, a working copy for review, and a log of who listened when. In that recording, a man says he stabbed the victim and gives information that directs officers to a knife later recovered. We don't guess at tone, we don't dramatize the words. What matters forensically is the time the call hit the system, the duration, and the routing notes. The call time matches the window after the flight reported by a passerby in Chapter 1. The system clock is compared against patrol car GPS clocks only to confirm the timekeeping, not to build movement paths we don't have. Tight files win by refusing to color outside the lines. Car-to-dispatcher radio traffic is mapped next. Each transmission logs a unit number, location callouts, and status changes. Arrival, scene secure, transport, perimeter. Radio timestamps corroborate the first officer's presence when witnesses said help arrived within minutes. Where there's any drift between dispatch screen time and unit time, text note the delta and, if needed, reconcile it with the agency's timing policy. Little mismatches can sink big trials. The goal is to show a jury that every clock in Phoenix told the same story that night. CCTV is the other half of clean clocks. Detectives request exterior feeds from the Home Depot facade and neighboring storefronts. They don't promise a full visual, they ask for one. If a feed exists, it gets pulled to a secure server with a chain separate from the vehicle and the weapon. Even when cameras miss the interior of a car, they grab movement. Arrivals, a figure exiting the passenger side, a brief exchange with a passerby, and direction of travel. Video is checked for frame rate and time-based drift. A 1-minute offset can scramble a timeline if no one owns it early. Here, the practice stays disciplined. Adjust the footage to the CAD spine, not the other way around. Carrier records focus on call detail, not app trails. For this era, public reporting supports records that anchor the 911 admission and any relevant calls around it. Investigators avoid fishing. They define the window, request what's justified, and compare the return against what they already know. The admission call lands after the flight described at the lot and before officers recover the knife. If the records show gaps, no outgoing activity during the run from the car to the call, That becomes negative evidence supporting a narrative of isolation, not coordination. No second phone, no group text, no third-party ping shows up in what's been reported. The absence won't prove motive, but it trims speculation. Financial checks are scoped, not open-ended. Detectives look for obvious planning signatures, recent purchases of edged tools, returns at nearby hardware counters, or cash withdrawals synced to the night in question. Public sources in this case don't list a receipt trail tied to the weapon. That matters. When there's no procurement footprint, prosecutors lean back on intent inferred from actions and the medical findings, not on a shopping ledger. The digital unit writes its memo like an affidavit. What artifacts exist, where they came from, who handled them, and how they align with the established times. It's deliberately dull on the surface. Dull reads as credible. If a defense expert later argues that the 911 time could be off, the memo points to the agency's clock sync policy and the cross-check against radio traffic. If they argue the video time is unreliable, the memo shows the offset test and the correction method. Every potential attack gets a paragraph, not a debate. There's a human layer, and we don't ignore it. In towns like this part of Phoenix, people still call for help when they see trouble. Those overlapping calls are the reason the ambulance moved when it did. The digital trail isn't cold code. It's neighbors doing the right thing and a system that, on this night, recorded quickly enough to matter. The data aligned cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. Sometimes it's just good police work converging with fast action. What we do not do here is backfill a story with tech we don't have. No GPS pings, no app histories, no speculative path lines across a map. We stay with clocks, radio, audio, and any camera that survived the night. The picture that emerges is narrow: a confined assault inside a closed vehicle, a run on foot, a 911 admission that leads to a weapon, and no digital trace of a second actor hovering at the edges. Next, we move from screens to people, statements that either match the ledger or break against it. Detectives move from logs and cameras to words. Witnesses are separated and interviewed on record. The bystander near the Prius reports a man stepping out, grabbing a bag, and leaving quickly. No one places a stranger at the driver's side during the assault. Negative evidence that narrows possibilities. The most critical detail is the victim's last statement, recorded while medics worked. According to police and court filings, she named her attacker. Treated as a dying declaration, it is logged with exact conditions for admissibility. Hours later, a 911 call comes in, an admission that also leads to the recovery of the knife. Every account is cross-checked against CAD times and available surveillance. Conflicts are noted, but the clocks anchor credibility. Relationship strain, reports of annulment talks, is captured as context, not yet labeled motive. Investigators keep restraint here, preserving testimony for trial use. We shift to questions about preparation. Did anyone buy a blade for this, scout the lot, or stage a getaway? Or did a private argument explode in a public place? Detectives pursue the paper that answers quietly: receipts, surveillance pulls, bank logs, and warrant returns. Search warrants authorize a narrow sweep: point-of-sale records from hardware and outdoor retailers within a practical radius of the Home Depot, video around register banks, and any return desks that might show an exchange. Analysts pull transaction histories tied to known cards, then look for cash withdrawals that precede the assault by hours, not days. Subpoenas go to banks for ATM logs and to stores for camera clips that might catch a purchase of knives or multi-tools. Inventory systems can flag UPCs linked to edged weapons. That data only matters if a person of interest appears at the counter on video at a matching time. According to police summaries and contemporaneous media, no public filing describes a prior receipt for the recovered knife. That absence becomes negative evidence of planning, not proof of impulse by itself. Investigators write the absence like a lab result: no retail purchase associated within the defined window. It's not a flourish, it's a limiter on theory. Online order history is checked through additional warrants when warranted by probable cause. Account records from major retailers are compared against shipping timelines. Anything delivered days earlier could still matter if it traveled with the couple. In this record, nothing publicly reported ties an e-commerce purchase to the weapon. Analysts note the gap and move on to situational planning signals: texts arranging a meeting spot, saved map pins, or ride-hail activity. The earlier digital chapter already constrained that lane. Here, investigators simply confirmed that carrier returns did not surface coordinating messages with third parties around the time of the assault. Proximity behavior is another planning tell. Detectives review exterior cameras for any pre-assault loops through the lot that suggest scouting. They look for vehicles idling in the shadows or a second car arriving right after the stabbing. The known sequence remains tight. A confined assault inside the Prius, a man exiting the passenger side and leaving fast, and a later 911 admission that directs police to a knife. No footage publicly described shows a second driver or pickup, and no coordinated rendezvous surfaces in the limited records referenced earlier. When the picture stays narrow, prosecutors lean more on intent inferred from conduct and the medical findings than on purchase trails. Medical and travel indicators are checked as well. Hospitals and urgent care centers sometimes create a footprint when someone shows up after a violent encounter. Airlines and inter-city buses generate PNR records if flight is contemplated. There is no public reporting that the subject sought medical treatment for defensive injuries or attempted travel out of state in the hours that followed. That lack of movement supports a local, short-window event rather than a plotted departure. All of this feeds a simple decision tree. If there had been a clear purchase of a specific knife shortly before the assault, paired with messages suggesting confrontation, first-degree arguments might grow. When those elements aren't present in the record, second-degree, intent without premeditation, often becomes the charge that matches what can be proved. It's not a downgrade for sympathy, it's alignment to evidence. By the time this chapter closes, the planning file looks spare. No public receipt tied to the weapon, no corroborated rendezvous, no travel prep, no third-party coordination in the window that matters. What remains is conduct at the car, the victim's statement, the admission call, and a recovered knife under chain. In violent crime work, sometimes absence is the strongest contour on the map. Next, we address why prosecutors chose second-degree murder, how designators apply, and how agency roles shape that path. Once procurement checks returned thin, focus shifted from what was bought to what could be charged. Prosecutors had to align the stabbing in the Home Depot parking lot with Arizona's homicide statutes. The victim, Alicia Grant, had named her attacker before dying, and that statement held confirmed evidentiary weight. The weapon was recovered under chain, and the defendant, Stephen Dennis, admitted to his involvement during an emergency call. These elements provided a strong base for intent, but left premeditation unsupported by records of purchase or long-range planning. According to court filings reviewed in August 2025, Maricopa County prosecutors advanced second-degree murder rather than first-degree. The reasoning followed a common line. Intent was clear in the act and the injuries, but the absence of a demonstrable plan narrowed the charge. Legal analysts note that juries expect evidence of prior preparation, receipts, texts, or surveillance before elevating to premeditated murder. Without those, a conviction for second degree carries certainty, while an overreach risks acquittal. Interagency roles remained procedural. Phoenix police led the field investigation, securing the vehicle and chain of custody logs. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office filed the charging documents, supported by forensic pathologists and digital analysts. Federal authorities were not required. No interstate travel, no weapons trafficking, no interstate commerce hooks arose. The FBI was briefed but did not assume jurisdiction. State boundaries kept the case local, an important detail for consistency in handling. Detectives and prosecutors met to review every admissible line, the victim's statement at the scene, the absence of forced entry, the admission call, and the physical recovery of the knife. Each was entered with preliminary, working, and confirmed designations before being finalized in disclosure. Discovery rules meant defense counsel received every tested lead, including the negative evidence of no retail receipts. Prosecutors documented that gap to prevent later challenges. By late summer, the charging packet was submitted, bail was denied, and trial preparation moved forward under second-degree murder as the core count. Domestic violence aggravators were considered but ultimately subsumed into the homicide charge. In the U.S.-owned system, narrowing focus often increases the chance of conviction. The community watching the case saw not only an act of violence but the weight of a legal system calibrating evidence to statute. From a human angle, the decision underscored how the law balances certainty against theory. Families may want the harshest label, but prosecutors aim for the charge that will hold at trial. In this crime, the certainty of intent carried the day. And next comes the question of admissibility: what evidence the court allowed, what motions shaped the record, and how the case was positioned before a jury. We move from charging to what survives the courtroom gate. Prosecutors file notice that they intend to use three anchors: the victim's statement identifying her attacker while medics worked, the recorded 911 admission that later guided officers to a knife, and the physical recovery of that knife under chain. Defense counsel answers with standard challenges: suppress the emergency call as involuntary, exclude the dying declaration as hearsay, and limit references to relationship strain as more prejudicial than probative. A voluntariness hearing is set on the emergency call. According to court filings and prosecutor summaries, the state establishes that the admission was placed by the defendant, was not the product of custodial interrogation, and was recorded through the public safety system with intact metadata. The judge finds it admissible both as a party-opponent admission and as an excited utterance tied to an ongoing emergency. Body-worn camera and dispatch logs are used to confirm the clock and routing. The defense claim of coercion fails when the record shows there was no custodial questioning at the time. Next is the dying declaration. The court takes testimony from the first responders who heard the victim speak while life-saving efforts were underway. Under the state's evidence rules, a statement made under the belief of impending death is admissible for the cause or circumstances of that death. The judge rules that the predicate conditions are met: critical medical state, lack of time to fabricate, and content squarely about the assault. The declaration is admitted with a limiting instruction. The jury will be told precisely how to weigh it. Separate motions in limine cut away potential sideshows. Relationship context is capped at what is necessary to explain presence and escalation. There is no allowance for character evidence untethered to the crime. The state agrees to avoid speculative language about motive unless tied to testimony or the medical findings. Bail remains denied based on the gravity of the offense and the strength of the proof the court has previewed. Calendar calls approach. With the 911 admission in, the dying declaration in, the knife under chain, and the digital timeline aligned to dispatch, risk analysis shifts. First degree would require premeditation the public record doesn't show. Second degree centers intent in the act proved by medical conclusions and the defendant's own words. On advice of counsel, and according to contemporaneous media and court records, the defendant elects to plead guilty to second-degree murder in Maricopa County Superior Court. There is no trial by jury. The plea sets a factual basis. The defendant stabbed Alicia Grant during a confrontation in a vehicle at a North Phoenix Home Depot lot. Actions that caused her death, without a claim of self-defense and without proof of premeditation. Sentencing is scheduled in August 2025. The court hears brief aggravation mitigation presentations. The state argues the vulnerability of a confined victim and the lasting harm to family. The defense cites acceptance of responsibility and the absence of a documented procurement plan. Victim impact statements are read into the record. The judge references the seriousness of the crime and the weight of the admissible record, the dying declaration, the emergency admission, and the recovered weapon, then pronounces sentence. 18 years in the state system. Credit for time already served is noted administratively. The order commits the defendant to the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation Reentry. The file closes in a way that is direct, not dramatic. No conspiracy threads, no second scene, no disputed ending, just a narrow sequence tested by clocks, medical fact, and the defendant's own voice. For families and communities, justice seldom feels like repair. It feels like a line held. In violent crime work, precision is the respect that can still be given. As we step out, it's worth saying aloud. Calls from strangers who act within minutes, medics who document exactly, officers who guard chain of custody. These are ordinary people doing disciplined things. That discipline is why a single night in a parking lot could be reconstructed at all, and why a court could answer the central question cleanly. Looking back on this crime, I can't help but think about how quickly life can change and how fragile trust really is. When a marriage turns violent, the damage is permanent, not just for the victim, but for families, neighbors, and entire communities. My takeaway is clear. Silence never protects, and warning signs deserve to be acted upon before it's too late. What do you believe makes the biggest difference? Community support, stronger laws, or simply the courage to speak out? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. If this story touched you, let me know where you're watching from. And if not, tell me why. And if you want more true stories that matter, Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next case.